Starting. And here we go with another CR live. So as you see on your screen right now, that is the current state of play for the Senate map. This is Real Clear Politics. So we're going to use them as a baseline. And I have some CR fellows here with me that we're going to talk about this. The big thing, obviously, is that for a long time people were talking about the blue wave that was going to run across the nation and wipe all Republicans away, but that may not be the case. So with me today is Daniel Horowitz, senior editor and writer at Conservative Review in your upper right. Apologize for any technical difficulties. His bunker is far below ground. Chris Pandolfo in your lower left, who, if you've watched us before, has been with us. He is staff writer at CR. And then Nate Madden, who is editor of the Capitol Hill Brief newsletter and video product, and just kind of our Hill rat, if you will, and I mean that in an affectionate way, kind of running down all the different scoops on what's going on. So let's just jump right into this, gentlemen, after those pleasantries. I'm sure we're going to have some people joining us here shortly. What is the one state that you're really looking at to be the bellwether for whether or not you know, the Republicans hold the Senate? Or I could even go as far as to say, is there anyone who doesn't think that at this point the Republicans hold the Senate?
All right, Joe. Well, it's good to finally be at one of these events. Darn technology, I hate it. But anyway, it's Florida. You know it's all about Florida. It always has been about Florida. It always will be. Not that that's going to determine Senate control, because Republicans, well, Democrats have 80 to 85 seats, I mean, in reality. But if you count the people with R's next to their name, so they're not going to lose control at this point. My view is they're going to win 2 to 3, and there's an outside shot for 4 if the election were held today. Florida is the pivotal race that, to me, will determine whether it's just Republicans merely doing well in the Senate because they have a favorable map with states like Missouri and Indiana and North Dakota, Tennessee, Arizona, where Trump won a tremendous margins, 20, 25, 30 points in some states. And, you know, they're just lucky that it's unfavorable territory, but they're going to get crushed in the House. Or is it closer than that? And Florida is always the battleground. If they win in Florida, I think that will mean they would likely win 4 Senate seats. And not only that, they would have a shot at possibly keeping the House.
Well, you just teased away our House rundown coming up next week, but that's okay. I mean, what do you guys say in terms of what Daniel says, leaving aside the House for a while? I mean, do you think that the Republicans can pick up, actually gain states here in this in the midterms in the Senate?
I think there's always been the chance that the Republicans have a shot at gaining Senate seats in places
always?
like Missouri.
Like during this entire, well, I mean, but I mean, that's not what the polls were saying.
No, but Joe, I mean, here's the deal, that this could be a blue wave, not a massive wave, a mini wave, but it's a blue wave of 2018, not 1974. What do I mean by that? In the polarized society we're in, even if you have a year where Democrats crush it with their demos, win people in the middle, but no matter what, there's a red side that's impervious to it, that certainly post-Kavanaugh was shored up. So if the Senate races are in states like these states, they were always poised to do better in the Senate, even if they'd lose 40 seats in the House.
Daniel's exactly right. And the states that I'm thinking of that Republicans are always going to pick up are states like Missouri, where Claire McCaskill is running, and Josh Hawley is a good candidate who's won statewide before. Indiana, where Mike Pence is from, I think Joe Donnelly is going to lose there. States like North Dakota, where Heidi Heitkamp is now trailing the polls behind Kevin Cramer. Just these states where Trump won with massive margins. So I've always thought that those are the states that Republicans are pretty much guaranteed to pick up at least 2 or 3 of them. Now, the state that is going to signify whether there's a blue wave or not for me is going to be Nevada, where you have Dean Heller running for re-election, and that's a state where Hillary Clinton won. So if the Democrats are really as energized as the media keeps telling us, you're going to see Dean Heller get knocked out. That's going to be a net gain for Republicans, but not as big as there could have been, because they're going to lose at least 1 seat. And Arizona was very similar, where I thought that Kirsten Sinema had a chance of taking Jeff Flake's seat where Martha McSally is running.
Of course, the difficulty of gauging comparative turnout numbers is, well, it's, to reuse the word difficult, just because the galvanizing moment for this election, yeah, there have been a ton of October surprises that have come out in the last week, without a doubt, and we'll get to those in a second. But the galvanizing moment was the Kavanaugh confirmation of the Kavanaugh hearings. We don't have any primaries following that to gauge how that's going to affect GOP turnout. And that's really going to be the X factor that we can't measure right now. Sure, we can look at all the different polls that show that it's really shored up the difference in the enthusiasm between Republicans and Democrats. But I think it's gonna play a huge role that we really can't measure at this point.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that what we are seeing now is the galvanization of sort of where the Republicans were going to be, and probably even a little more motivation where they could and should be after the Kavanaugh hearings. I mean, one of the things in I'm going to try and pull this up here is this is the RCP, the Real Clear Politics, sort of the toss-up states in seats and where they're going. And I know you guys can't see it on your screen, but if you're on the website, what you see is after that Kavanaugh hearing, you had pretty much, this is how it's going to go. You know, it's between 48 and 50 seats for the Republicans. It's real close. And then all of a sudden there's seat after seat after seat that have gone from either toss-up into the red column or you know, at least into the toss-up column. And so what I think that signifies is you had your Kavanaugh moment. Now the question becomes, how many seats do they pick up? And if they do, I don't think that it automatically means, but again, teasing sort of what we're going to talk about in the House is, I think for the first time, you can legitimately, without trying to have a quote unquote hot take, talk about the Republicans holding on to the House. Now, the question becomes, can a couple of these controversies that have come up, and Nate, you were alluding to this here in Arizona with Kirsten Sinema, could that be the next step where if we're pulling out these October surprises, could it be enough to not only gain 1 or 2 seats in the Senate, but go, you know, to 4 or 5 where you don't have to worry about the Lisa Murkowskis, and then talk about that as more galvanization when it comes to the House? I mean, is that possible?
I think it's possible everywhere for whatever reason except Montana. Montana doesn't seem to have budged. And it's, along with the rest of these vulnerable Democratic seats, everything else, you know, you've seen modest upticks in some, bigger upticks in others following the Kavanaugh hearing. And then you've got 2 or 3 big opposition dumps kind of tanking Kirsten Sinema's centrist play out in Arizona. You've got the whole import fiasco with Joe Donnelly's attempt to paint Mike Braun as a guy who outsources American jobs. Turns out his family company does the same thing. It imports parts from China. You've got an ethics probe launched against Joe Manchin for his $700,000 yacht that he lives in when he's here in D.C. You got a lot of this stuff all falling down. The only thing that I've really seen go up against John Tester in Montana so far is a report that kind of downplays his hunting claims, and he hasn't pulled a hunting license in years, which neither have I, and I'm ticked about that, but you know, I don't have time.
Yeah, I mean, and we were talking about this before we jumped on here, but the whole idea of a state like Montana, what people don't realize is that you have somebody who's been in the Senate for a while, and that name ID is gold. I mean, it's sort of old school politics where no matter what you do, they're always going to have the percentage of what they got their vote, you know, and then some. I mean, it's almost 100% name ID in the fact that anybody who's voting has seen that name on a ballot before. And in a place like Montana, I mean, nowadays people don't watch TV like they used to. And so advertising, you're like, oh, well, that should be even easier because there's, you know, less reach and blah. But it's so difficult to figure out how to target these people. So I don't look at a place like Montana and worry too much about it. Go ahead.
But the thing, Joe, is that Tester has done a great job of playing the double game. He almost never dissents in Washington. I mean, you saw he even voted against Kavanaugh, but he's just kept this moderate persona back at home. Democrats have succeeded in that. They've had Democrat governors for many years there, and they just kind of succeed in this double game. But I do think Trump is on his way to Montana, actually, and he is going to campaign in the western part of the state over the weekend. And I think this is where the Trump factor matters. It still is a red state. Trump is still more popular there. And I think this is where they have the hope. My math, just to go over my math, why do I say 2 to 3 with an outside shot of 4, even though I'm actually very bearish on Republican prospects in the House? Here's the math. Let's go through the defense states where Republicans have to defend states. Tennessee, that's pretty much wrapped up. I mean, I think we could all agree.
Yeah.
You know, she was never going to lose Marsha Blackburn, even though it's an open seat. Ted Cruz ain't losing there. So it really boils down to Arizona and Nevada. And now because of the turn in momentum and the cinema gaffes, I think, you know, Martha McSally, I don't like her as a conservative, but she's a formidable candidate. I think she has a pretty good chance. You know, Nevada is very close, and you know, Republicans could easily still lose that. On the other end of the spectrum, you have North Dakota, we pretty much have. Then you have the pool between Indiana, Missouri, and Florida. Between those three, I think it's very likely Republicans could pick up 2, and that would get their pickup a total of 3, but then they could lose Nevada, so it would take the net down to 2. But then, again, they could win all 3, and then there's always the opportunity to pull in the next tranche, which is West Virginia and Montana. I don't think I'm leaving out any. So that's where I kind of get the 2 to 3 on net. Curious what you guys think.
I think your math's pretty much spot on. I mean, those are all the places where I thought Republicans were going to win. And Florida is one of those states where for a while it was looking like it was the only state not getting hit by the blue wave. Republicans were up in all the polls. More recent polling is showing that it's really more of a toss-up than it was appearing to be. One of the things that I keep thinking about is why Republicans seem to be blowing their chances to win in 2 states where Trump won, and that's Ohio and Pennsylvania. If you look at the Senate candidates, there's Renacci in Ohio and Lou Barletta in Pennsylvania. You know, why do you guys think those guys aren't catching on?
So in Ohio, I mean, you know what I think. I mean, Renacci, Rhino is as Rhino does. I mean, there's just not a dime's worth of difference. This is the John Kasich party. You got in the governor's race, Richard Cordray, the original head of the CFPB under Obama. He's running on the same Medicaid program that Kasich created, who's officially a Republican. And then you got Mike DeWine as the Republican gubernatorial candidate, Renacci as the senatorial candidate, milquetoast as could be. The one thing you got to be fair is that because Josh Mandel, who conservatives wanted to run, he was the original candidate, but he had to drop out because of health issues with his wife. So Renacci got a very late start, so he's really lagging in fundraising. And then Pennsylvania is just
I mean the top of the ticket there there's an ad for those of you that haven't seen it that came out today where the Republican candidate
Wagner.
Let's just say it involves golf spikes and his opponent's face and make I mean
Tom Wolf, I'm going to stomp on your face with golf spikes, which is one of the stupidest things you can say when your party's strongest messaging point is this left-wing mob stuff that everybody's been seeing and dealing with.
Well, and golf spikes just reeks of like old country club Republican. I mean, it's
most golf spikes are rubber.
Yeah, they changed them. It doesn't. They don't even hurt. They're like safe for grass and stuff.
There's a metaphor in there somewhere, but
about
dig into
about 4 putting on the 18th hole when you're up 2. I mean, But that's the point. When you have somebody top ticket, and you're always going to have those. So if the Republicans who have the majority, like you have to toss, so you toss that state out, and I'm fine with tossing that state out. But the one thing, and this is a race, and look, I am not saying we're taking this, and I've been very down, not on the candidate, and Chris would agree with me, and Daniel's had his doubts, I know, but John James in Michigan. I think the guy... and from everything I know and people I've spoken to here in my state, is a legitimate candidate. I have serious questions, and from the get-go have had serious questions about his campaign team. I have run Senate campaigns. I have been on a Senate campaign here in Michigan. I know what it takes. We did not win, but I started with a candidate who had 1% name ID, which is about where John James started. We had to go through a terrible primary. They didn't. They saved their cash for the end. Now, up until about 4 days ago, I had no thought that there was anything even close to a snowball's chance in Hell, Michigan, which is like the lower part of the state. It's like right here. But the deal is, the polls have been trending, and I'm talking big numbers. I mean, Stabenow by RCP, like just a little while ago, less than a month, 3 weeks ago, was plus 23. And then she was plus 18. And then she was plus 9 just the other day in a Mitchell poll, which is pretty reliable. Now, again, I'm not saying that he wins or pulls one out, but here's the deal. That's trending in the wrong direction for her, in serious trending. And if he's doing that here in Michigan, this is the sort of soil and climate that a Trump, last minute campaign blitz could come and push things over the top. So again, you don't move Senate races that much that quickly. He still could. That's how Spence Abraham won back in the day. But that could, again, teasing next week's House rundown, that could mean a lot of things when you have, you're talking about 300, 400,000 people where only 100 or 200,000 people vote. Because now you're talking about motivating 5 to 10,000 people. And that's a lot easier, both logistically, financially, everything. So that's the state I'm watching right now, both as a blue and a red wave sort of. That's my barometer right now. Is I'm watching, because that tells me sort of which way the winds are blowing. Because in a state where one guy's spending all his money and all she has to do is throw a couple dollars here or there to stem the tide, those are big movement numbers. I mean, to go from plus 23 to plus 9, I mean, that's big to me.
Joe,
here on Stabenow versus James. Joe, what is Obamacare coverage and premiums? What do they look like in Michigan?
I mean, Michigan has had issues. We went to Medicaid. We did the Medicaid expansion. I mean, my premiums have continued to go up. I've changed plans now twice. But since Obamacare has come up, because we've had to go down. So that's problematic. The state here has been on a comeback for a while. Snyder did some decent economic things, but the Trump economy completely flipped everything. Now, the only thing that's really hurting now is that Ford has said that they're going to do a massive layoff. And
tariffs.
They're tying it to tariffs.
Oh.
Now, the problem is, half of it is, yes, tariffs, which you were always going to see that. But the other half has to do with what Ford is doing, and the unions are playing up the tariff thing, of course.
Well, yeah. But what I'm trying to say with Obamacare here is Debbie Stabenow led the Senate discharge petition to try to block the Trump administration rule on expanding short-term health care plans. These are the more affordable, bare-bones, catastrophic coverage plans that the liberals hate.
Is anyone running on that?
Well, that's the thing. If I'm John James, that is what I hammer home as hard as I can from here on out, because she led the discharge petition. She was the one who got the 30 signatures and forced the vote earlier this week. I wrote about that over at CR. You can read it over there.
But problem,
if I'm John James, I'm hammering that home.
And so herein lies the whole horse race thing, and we could go into Michigan, and I won't. But the problem with states like Michigan, and you see this, and Daniel and Chris have mentioned Ohio and Pennsylvania, when you have states that are big geographically and there's a lot of people, you have a lot of central cities, and those are blue in these states. In these Midwest Rust Belt states, those big population centers are blue. And then the rest of the state is mostly red. Now, you would think, oh, well, I put all my money near those one places, and then it's really easy to cover the rest. But it's not easy. You don't get to fly around. You have to drive around, and you have to do these things. And TV isn't what it was. And internet is it's
Twitter doesn't vote.
Twitter doesn't vote, and the problem is no one has really figured out how to run an insurgent campaign in these Rust Belt states, because the state parties keep doing the stupid thing and making primary so difficult. Now, John James was the first candidate where there wasn't a blow by blow death knell primary, and so he came out of it fairly unscathed and being able to secure his money. But then having sort of establishment people running his campaign, and because you've got a gubernatorial race, and you've got all these things going on, he doesn't get to go out there and run the campaign he needs to run. And I don't know where to put my finger on the blame exactly, but I think when you look around some of these other places, like we talk about Montana and we talk about Pennsylvania, the problem is a Senate race or a House race they're not at the top of the ticket most of the time. The gubernatorial race is, and gubernatorial politics in Rust Belt states are very different than a Senate race, even though they're both statewide. They just are different creatures.
And Joe, to me, that might be the most disappointing aspect for Republicans of this entire election. It's the Rust Belt gubernatorial races. We're getting crushed. I mean, you know this, in Michigan, in Ohio, and in Pennsylvania, and could lose Iowa as well. And Illinois is gone, the incumbent, because he was a liberal dumpster fire. He's down 20, 25 points. Here's the problem with that. And here's why you have the divergent outcomes with Republicans likely picking up Senate seats elsewhere, but I still think we'll almost certainly lose the House, because if you look at the House seats, the vulnerable House seats in places like Pennsylvania, Illinois, Michigan, and then certainly when you go to the blue states of New Jersey, New York, and California, just in those states alone, you have no GOP pulse or very underperforming at the top of the ticket. I don't see enough energy to get out these very faint light red districts in the blue states or in swing states that are blue this year. I don't see enough votes to win those districts.
Let me ask you guys another question that I've been thinking about too, just in terms of the Senate races and some of the places where you might just be on the edge of winning. Do you think Trump's rallies make a difference?
I do, but I want to hear what other people do, again, because I'm biased by what Michigan is, and we saw that they worked at least when it came to the presidential race. But
no, Chris, that's an excellent question, because that's going to be the question everyone's asking after the election. Everyone's concerned with Trump. If you love him, he's the savior. If you hate him, it's all his fault. And that's the question they'll be asking. I think it certainly helps. And the reason is this. It's a trick question. Does Trump help or hurt? Well, the hurting is baked into the cake. That is already there. The fact that he's jazzed up the other side and has lost some suburban voters, that is baked. The question is, are we going to also get his benefits? Until now, the polls have been terrible because we're securing all the liabilities, but we're not getting the benefits. I think when he goes and puts his name on it, maybe you could get some of those blue-collar voters that were traditionally not voting, some voted Democrat, maybe you could get some of them back to narrow up the margins, win places like Montana, not going to win in Michigan, but maybe it will be competitive enough to save some of the House seats.
Yeah, Trump seems to have, this is the thing that blew everybody's mind.
Nate, can you just move up to your microphone just a bit?
Yes.
Thank you.
This is the thing that blew everybody's mind in 2016, right? So Trump has this ability when he goes and he gets in front of a crowd, and he first off, he draws a huge crowd. I mean, I think I saw a video from his last one in Tennessee where, I mean, it was just miles and miles of human beings, it was amazing. He gets a lot of people in the door and he gets them fired up. And, if we're talking about, doing retail politics on a large scale, that is just napalm for getting a fire lit under some people's rear ends.
Yeah, Nate, it would be interesting to see what some people on the Hill have to say about whether or not they want Trump. Obviously these people are doing polling, and so it'd probably be more House races, I would think. But it would be interesting to see if people want, this is always the question in these races is, what surrogates do you have coming in, and do you want sort of like coming to your state at the last minute, before you have that final 72 hours, 48 hours or whatever, because I don't know what it's going to do. I really don't.
I think in any state that Trump won in 2016 on net, you'd be dumb to turn him down.
Amen.
If it's in some, like I said, these traditionally very, very light, pale red districts in blue states, I wouldn't want him there. But in a lot of these other places, you take a look at, Montana, you got to be dumb. Matt Rosendale. Look, no one's running on my agenda. Let's face it. They're not stoking up people's. Marsha Blackburn, I think, is doing a pretty good job, but she stands out. And you need a pulse. It's not turning out our people and also what I call the Ross Perot voters, which really were the Trump voters. I think you need that. Except in places where he's going to be only a liability, and that's in the blue states.
Right. I think that what you're going to see is Trump is going to go where it helps. I mean, Trump, for better or worse, his agenda, he can do things, and he has done things that he can have an effect on during his first 2 years. So when you look at the Trump accomplishments, if you will, there are things that the executive himself has a control over and has done. Where he has failed to sort of succeed in the eyes of conservatives is where you kind of needed Congress. Now, I'm not trying to be a Trump apologist here, but I was thinking about this. And if you're like me, who was either a never Trumper or like myself, which was look, I don't think he's a conservative. I want him instead of Hillary, but I think at the end of the 4 years is we're going to have a George W. Bush, in the sense that we're going to try and hang conservative wins on him, when in reality that's the bare minimum. And that's what you've had for these 2 years. I think it's more than the bare minimum, but now he needs to get conservatives and Republicans who are actually Republican to do things with him. And this is his opportunity. And if I were him, I would try and do everything I could to get that House red, and definitely get a few more there. So that's why it's going to be interesting to see what his tactics are and what the rest of these candidates, the Republican candidates, do, because I mean, I'm rolling the dice if I'm a candidate and I'm close, bringing him in, because I think the Kavanaugh moment, for the most part, might pull a couple of those like grumpy, folding my arms, not voting Republican again type guys and gals off the couch to go vote.
So I have one more question for you guys.
And I appreciate, Chris, I just want to give you props. Thank you for being the question person, because I've gotten some flack for being, you sound so wishy-washy. And it's like, well, I'm trying to, elicit some conversation. So I appreciate you kind of...
Always the squish.
Always the squish.
Can I answer this question? Then I can run down the street to a TV hit.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, let Nate go, and then we'll say adieu to him, because I know he has to go on.
All right, what you got, Chris?
All right, so, let's say the Republicans do pick up 2 or 3 to 5 Senate seats, like we all seem to think that they're going to do. Does that change the way the United States operates? Because you have Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who are these 2 swing votes that take the 51-seat majority they have now and basically upset everything they're trying to do by saying, ooh, I don't know what I'm going to vote. We just saw that happen with Kavanaugh, right? So if you pick up 2 more senators who nullify those swing votes, what changes in the Senate after the election?
Nothing, except for one thing. One thing changes. If, and this is by no means a guarantee, and it's kind of weird talking about it because you don't want to wish someone dies, but just, and I'm just saying, if she were to move on within 2 years, so then presumably you wouldn't have the same problem we had with relying on Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. But for everything else, and when I say everything, I don't just mean legislation, I mean even other nominations. Part of the problem they have with the other noms, the executive noms, they got rid of the filibuster for the executive noms too. And Susan Collins hasn't been giving a problem, but the problem is there's several hundred executive noms. So even if they don't filibuster, Nate, you know this from the dilatory tactics, the unanimous consent agreements that they have to agree upon, they chew up the Senate clock. So unless Republicans would keep them in over weekends to leverage them to relent, which McConnell has refused to do, they're going to spend all the time on noms and not even get through all of them. And then on the legislation, we don't even, there's nothing doing.
The big question is, how many of these pickups do you think are going to be more of the conservative insurgents in the chamber, and how many of them do you think are actually going to be dragged around by the nose by Mitch McConnell? I mean, that's the ultimate question. Yeah, of course, on the one issue where Republicans are unified, well, except for tax cuts for the most part, yeah, if they have to replace another Supreme Court justice, that'll go a lot smoother, presumably. The other question is on what? There's the bare minimum idea that you might try to bring up Obamacare repeal through another reconciliation package, and the math might be more favorable. But that's not going to happen because you've got so many Republicans who are now actively campaigning on preserving Obamacare. They're campaigning on saving portions of Obamacare that make it expensive.
Just so everyone in the audience needs to know this.
Yeah.
There's
who and who out of that group do you think is going to be the deciding catalyst factor on getting a more Republican base oriented immigration bill across the Senate floor. First off, since it's not going to be tied to reconciliation, except maybe for wall enforcement funding, you're going to have to deal with a 60 threshold. So they're going to throw their hands up or just give it a head pat vote at some point, which is what they did with the last few. I don't see that dynamic changing anywhere but the one thing where Senate leadership actually shows that they're not complete invertebrates, and that's on Supreme Court nominations.
Yep. And they're not going to relent on the filibuster, do any reforms, force a talking filibuster. And, you know, the only thing, as we always say, the only leverage is in the budget fights.
Yep.
But all but 5, 6 senators are terrified of that. So you're nowhere close to the threshold. As far as Obamacare is concerned, so there's no misunderstanding. There's this talking point among Republican thumbsuckers that look, Republicans really want to get rid of it. It's just narrow. It was because of McCain, Murkowski, and Collins. That's not true. It's the opposite. It's everyone with the exception of 3 to 4 to 7 on the conservative end support the regs, the subsidies, and the Medicaid expansion. Mitch McConnell said that himself, that was never a point of disagreement. We've all agreed that we have to keep these important protections, a root and branch, but not for that part.
Not that root and not that branch.
Exactly.
And this, I think, speaks to a larger issue, too, with all these Senate candidates. And the reason why things have been so close up until now is if you put a gun to my head, I could not tell you what the national message is for Republicans running for this reelection campaign, or what these senators are all running on the same issue to tell to people what they're going to do when they get to the United States Senate.
And I think that's, symptomatic of living in the Trump administration for 2 years. Nate, I know you got to go. I want to bid you adieu. Right. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to switch over to the U.S. Senate map so he can leave. So, now I appreciate everyone's patience with the technical difficulties with Daniel. Daniel, just to let you know, we have a picture of you up right now because your video feed got a little crazy. So, you don't really want to see us where, our opinions and our ideas, I think, are more important than our pretty faces. I mean, we all have faces that only a mother could love.
Hey, speak for yourself. I have a great face.
But I think that question that you just asked, Chris, was really important because you're right. And Daniel would sit here definitely and say it's not going to change that much. But back to what I was saying, if what Trump wants to do is now go beyond sort of executive accomplishments. So when those things are the most tangible for him because he can do them.
Yep.
But to do the real things, to really transform the budget, to really transform the courts beyond what he can just sort of do. I mean, in Daniel, if you have not read Daniel's book, Stolen Sovereignty, please do so. I'm not just shilling for it. As somebody who's, I went to law school, I graduated, I passed the bar, I studied at a very conservative school. What Daniel brings to the table is more than what a lot of legal scholars do because he looks at it through a lens beyond just a legal lens. It's also a political lens. So it's the political judicial lens of how the courts operate and not just how the law is animated. So, but that being said, to do that, he needs Congress. And not just to approve these judges, he needs to reform and to pull back jurisdiction and all these things. So to do these, he needs a Republican at the very minimum and then a conservative Congress. And the only way to do that, I think, is to maintain the Senate, maybe squeak out the House, but even if they lose the House, show that going into 2020, that 2018 was just your typical, correction, market correction type, campaign, and then go into 2020 going, look, Trump is going to win a second term here. We're going to take back the House, and now we're going to blow it through. But I think it's here and now where he can, he needs to plant that flag and point in that direction.
And that's a conversation, too, that has to happen the day after the election day, Joe, as you're talking about 2020. It's not going to be enough just to elect more Republicans to the United States Senate.
Correct.
We're going to have to make sure that conservatives win the primaries. And if we don't have a plan to do that the day after the election, we're not going to see any gains.
And guys, I got to run soon, but I want to try to play a game with you. Buy or sell. All right, up or down. Are we improving each one? Let's assume Republicans would run the table on all the Senate races up now. I want to try to go through just to give a sense of, we're focusing on D to R, but what about R to C?
Right.
Republican to conservative. So start with Tennessee. To me, I think to all of us, that's an easy pickup because you're going from Bob Corkscrew to to Marsha Blackburn.
Yes.
That's a pickup.
No matter what you think of her, it's a pickup.
It's a pickup. You go to Arizona, where also it's a Republicans who are defending. That's John McCain, and now look, I really don't like Martha McSally, but that's still, I guess, moving it over.
Well, it's Jeff Flake's seat, right? It's not McCain. So
I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah.
So that is a pickup, I would say. I mean,
But let's take John McCain. So you take what with Kyle and McCain and then McSally. So what you have there is a net positive over McCain and Flake.
Yes.
No matter how you kind of shake it out. And it's 2 votes. So even if one of them votes the way both those guys would and one doesn't, or even if they both vote the way those guys would on something bad, you still don't have like way pulling leadership. So it's a pickup.
Sure.
There's still one state I don't think we've talked about at all yet. And Daniel, thank you for reminding me of this. We need to talk about Mississippi, because this is a state where you do actually have 2 Republicans on the ballot, because it's kind of a universal runoff. All the candidates are on the same ballot. And so you have the incumbent, Cindy Hyde-Smith, who's a political appointee, running against Chris McDaniel, who we all remember from 2014, who was a rock-ribbed conservative. And I think the last poll showed he was within 5 points of Cindy Hyde-Smith. But Cindy Hyde-Smith has President Trump's endorsement.
This is the most important Senate race. See, here's the deal. Let's just assume, and I'm going to play along, and you know my personal feelings, but I'm going to play along that it's so important that every Republican win and just vote Republican. But even if you take that line of thought, your number one priority, your focus, whether you're a donor, an activist, would be on your best pickup. I'm winning with a Republican, but my best Republican. You look at some of those other seats there. I mean, Kevin Cramer, North Dakota, he's got like a 36% score in the House. Big Rhino. I mean, yeah, you could say he's better than a Heitkamp, but I mean, he's going to be a problem with us on immigration, on certainly Obamacare and spending. You look at a guy like Chris McDaniel. Arguably, he catalyzed the Trump movement in many respects. He won at least the Republican vote against Thad Cochran. A lot of questions about how they got crossover voters. McDaniel won the first round, then Cochran ultimately won the second round. Then Cochran retired because of health issues. Open seat, the governor literally has no one to appoint and finds this random Cindy Hyde-Smith, who was a Democrat so much for her life that she's being accused by her opponent of voting for Hillary. Now, she swears to God she didn't vote for Hillary, but the point is,
the fact that that's even an issue
from freaking Mississippi. And here's my question to all you guys: why is there like all these? And I'm not trying to pick on people, but I remember Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity. They all endorsed Chris McDaniel. They were all on top of that. This is your revenge. This is the time to get it back. There's zero focus. Zero. It's like he's dead. What happened?
Daniel, you and I have talked about this before, and I mean, I think that you can't answer that question completely in a vacuum or in a bubble in terms of why Laura Ingraham or Sean Hannity or any of these individual people. I think you have to attack them question by question, individual by individual. But I would say in large part, it has to do with the establishment, and I hate using the vernacular from the 2012 and 2014 and 2016 cycle where we're talking establishment, Tea Party, conservative, but you still have that establishment in all of these states. And when somebody like Chris McDaniel, goes through, and you can look at Joe Miller, you can look at any of these people who had some sort of victory and then lost, there are a lot of people that are literally going, phew, wipe their brow from the sweat because they were nervous that an actual conservative would be in there. Because when you look at guys like Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, even though Ted's having a little bit of trouble in Texas this year in terms of not being able to just sort of be like automatic, once they're there, and they know that it's hard to unseat a conservative, even more so than it is an establishment person in a lot of these states, especially a state like Mississippi. So
yes,
it's not to say that Laura or Sean or any of these people are soft or whatever. It's just the establishment throws everything at them or puts their hands behind their back and whistles idly while the mainstream media and the left does it, because they know that if they can have a wounded candidate, they can not worry about them down the road. So even though Chris McDaniel like kind of comes back and is having a resurrection, you see like it's an RRD, which is perfect for the establishment. They're going, oh, well, in this case, you know, if we split our vote, we could have, you know, a Democrat in there, and we don't want that. So, like,
yep.
you know,
and that's how they got Trump to endorse Cindy Hyde-Smith over McDaniel, because they told, hey, you don't want another Roy Moore situation where there's a Democrat from a deep South red state, and that's really, I think, one of the issues that's going into play in terms of why Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity haven't stepped into this race. I couldn't tell you. Part of it, I think, is just that Trump kind of is a big personality. He just overshadows everything else that's going on. And so if you don't really want to, I don't want to say that they don't want to cross him, but they just don't want to challenge something. If he's endorsed Cindy Hyde-Smith, maybe they're just going to let Trump be Trump and let him do his own thing and not really wade into that. I don't know if that's what's going on, but it's just difficult.
Let's not forget, Trump is dynamic in the sense that he's not just a monolith in terms of a political figure, because he is so sort of back and forth on different things. You can't just carve a spot out and say, okay, this is Trump, because we don't know what we do, but I mean, Chris McDaniel has said things. He's very conservative. So there's a tension there for sure with McDaniel and Trump and other things. So, I mean, my issue, like I said, moving forward is I want to see what Trump is going to do with other conservatives and what he's going to do with the House and what he's going to do this last month. We're running, you know, a little bit here. I don't want to say long, but I know Daniel has to go soon and we all have to go. So why don't we wrap this up with one last question, and that is, I've said mine. Mine is Michigan. That's the state I'm keeping an eye on overall to kind of tell me where the winds are blowing, not just for the Senate, but for the House. And we'll talk about the House next week. What Daniel, state are you looking for is sort of your barometer, your flag in the wind?
So obviously we started out talking about Florida, I believe, is the barometer for the ability for Republicans to maintain those swing voters, even in a tough cycle where they're clearly losing a lot of suburban voters. That's always a 50-50 state. But and normally I believe Republicans probably would lose that in this type of environment. But they have, you know, the sitting governor, Rick Scott, so they got the best recruit out of that. Obviously, Ron DeSantis, who's running every single county. Even Romney won every single county. But Patrick Morrisey is really, I mean, until recently, most polls had him down double digits. And Joe Manchin just always seems to hang on in that state. He plays with the voters enough that they think he's one of them. But here's the question. That was before Trump, when it was just generic Republicans going after it. The state loves Trump. Everyone knows that, so much so that the governor became a Republican.
Yeah.
Will the Trump effect, if you're going to see a Trump effect, that's where it is. But what I question is, and tell me if I'm wrong, is Trump gunning for Manchin hard enough? Or does he have some sort of funny relationship with him? Because I think if he were to gun for him and park himself there, I think he could down him.
Again, I know we're running long. I don't want to go too much on this, but that's an interesting question because I've thought about that. My belief is always 43% or 43 points, whatever you want to call it. 43% of the vote in a poll is important. That's your number. You have to get above that to give yourself a fighting chance when you're the underdog. And while Morrissey has not done that. What's interesting is Manchin is dropping really close to that. RCP's average right now is 45.7. Now, again, polls, give them as much weight as you're willing to. But Daniel, I think what Trump is doing is he probably has a relationship with him because he doesn't think he's going to lose. But I think if you were to see him drop just a little more, you may see Trump go all out and roll the dice on that one. That's my thought, is that Trump is smart and smarter than I think people give him credit for. Now, I don't know how much he watches these horse races and how much he looks at the numbers. But
we know he's obsessed with polling, though, right?
Right. But that's what I mean. Like, I know what that means, but I don't know what it means in the context of these races for him.
So, but the point is, Joe, you two agree with me? It sounds like you're agreeing with me that until now, it seems like he's kind of pulled punches on him.
I think so.
I honestly think it's a simple matter of he looks at the polls, and if he sees the Democrat leading, he thinks, the other guy, the Republican's a loser, and I don't want to be associated with a loser. Because that's Trump's mentality. Is I'm a winner. I like winners. Winners like me.
But
you like me, we're going to win. And if you're not winning,
you've seen him jump in a few places where it speaks exactly to that it was sort of a race that was a little bit off the radar, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, why did he jump in here? And then that person goes on to win, and you're going, oh, he wasn't coming in to push him over the top. He saw it trending, and he got out in front of it to wave the flag like, hey, come vote for this guy. And it was already, it was just a lag effect. So that's really, I think you're right there, Chris, dead on with that one.
Yeah. So
and also just as a note, I mean, I think everyone sucks, but
Oh, really? No, I did not know that, Daniel.
You didn't know that, but even on my scale, I'm very uninspired by a lot of these Republican candidates. But Patrick Morrissey, I'm a law and order conservative, old-fashioned conservative. He actually, as Attorney General, he's very much up my alley. I don't know on all fiscal issues, but certainly on the law and order issues,
right?
He would be a good addition to the Senate.
Oh yeah,
cool.
From everything I know too.
So, Joe, I'm just going to go back to the question that you asked as the final question.
Yeah.
Watching this West Virginia candidate, the races I'm watching, in terms of whether or not there was actually a Kavanaugh bump that we can measure, that's Dean Heller's race in Nevada.
Okay.
If he pulls out of that one, Dean Heller won If Dean Heller pulls that out, I think that's purely because of the way the Democrats handled the Kavanaugh nomination. Yeah. And in Mississippi, I'm looking at the Chris McDaniel, Cindy Hyde-Smith, because the question I want answered there is there still a conservative movement independent of President Trump that can identify a conservative and beat a lifelong Democrat in a place where she's running as a Republican and there's a more conservative Republican who has a chance of winning?
And Chris, there's precedent for that. And I think, see, you're not going to want to hear this, but there is a comparison of Chris McDaniel to Roy Moore, and I'm not in the way of assuming that the allegations are true against him to say that it's like that with Chris McDaniel. But I mean, the establishment would say, yeah, he's kind of like him. I would say it's like him in the sense that until the allegations came out, and that was totally being struck by lightning.
Is Moore?
Yeah, against Moore, the sexual allegations, just in terms of his politics, he was easily winning that race in the general election. In the primary, Trump came down and stumped for Luther Strange, and you remember those stories very vividly,
right,
where all the people at the rallies would show up to hear Trump because they liked him, and they said, "Hey, we're voting for Roy Moore. We love Trump, but like, dude." Luther Strange is a dud.
That's what I'm talking about, because Mississippi is right next door to Alabama, right? And so I want to know if conservative voters saw what happened to Roy Moore and decided that they just can't take the risk of putting a Democrat in office by nominating a more of a firebrand conservative type guy.
Right.
Or if they recognize that was a fluke because the way the allegations broke against Roy Moore, that you might not have those with Chris McDaniel. And maybe we can try what we tried to do with Roy Moore again and actually elect the more conservative guy. Now, of course, assuming that there's no October surprise thing that's going to come out and just ruin the whole situation again. But that's what October is for. It's these surprises.
It is. So, well, guys, thanks a lot for coming on and spending time talking about this. I know there are those, especially people who follow along at Conservative Review, who like this horse race stuff. In the comments below, I'm going to put these gentlemen's Twitter links so that you can follow them. And I appreciate you watching. And I am going to leave you with the map as we sort of fade out here. To just kind of mull over and see the Senate map and see what we're doing. Again, Chris Pandolfo, Daniel Horowitz, and Nate Madden earlier. Thanks for watching CR Live. Subscribe, follow everyone on Twitter, and go to conservativereview.com. Thanks for watching.